So hello everyone, welcome to the first of our panel events, the Entrepreneurs Panel event. My name is Katie Wray, I'm the lead educator for this course. I am joined on the panel by Roland Glancy and Simon Laing, both of whom you will meet during the course. You should already have met Simon, either in his role as a mentor or in the first week where we've explored his story in the background to his business, the Cullercoats Bike Kayak. In week 4, you'll meet Roland and you'll hear more about his business, RadFan. And the reason we feature that within week 4 is it's a product invention. And we explore lots of things within week 4 about making your ideas tangible. And Roland's case study is a really good example there. I wanted to, first of all, mention how pleased we are about the number of comments that we have received both on Twitter and on the platform. I've had to whittle the 500 plus questions that we've received for this panel down into just around 20 questions. We'll see how we get on with that. Generally, I've chosen the questions that aren't going to be asked somewhere else or answered somewhere else within the platform. Of course, we don't have time to be able to answer all of your questions. So in some places, I've taken the theme of lots of questions and built them into one single question. And I'll try and accredit the people that were asking those questions within this panel event. So first of all, I'd like to start with the first question. So this question comes from Evgenia Tolstova. And a lot of people have been asking about this. But starting with Roland, first of all, what were you doing before you started this business, and is it your first idea?
So before I started my business, I was working in training to be an architect. I had done 6 years of training. It's a very long course. It's 7 years in total. After year 6 of 7, I was made redundant from my job, and this was during the credit crunch. There were no architecture jobs to be had within 300 miles of Newcastle where I lived. So I decided to look around and find something else to do, and found a course to do renewable energy enterprise and management at Newcastle University. And so that's kind of what I did following my architecture training. And that's when I really learnt about business and starting your own business and entrepreneurship, and that's where I came up with the idea for the RadFan, and it's really out the back of that course that I started the business in earnest.
And it's your first business?
It is my first business, yeah. I've never really been involved in entrepreneurship or people that run their own business. My family aren't entrepreneurs. None of my friends in particular were running their own business at the time, so it was really through studying entrepreneurship at university that I kind of learned about what it takes to be an entrepreneur, and identified that I actually have quite a few of those character traits, and it might be something that I'm good at.
Great, we've certainly been exploring that within the course. How about you, Simon?
Well, I was working at Newcastle University. I'd been there for about 9 years, I think, since graduating. Originally, I'd studied marine science, and then I found myself working in sort of marketing for Newcastle University for a long time. And then I sort of went back into marine science for a while, and I was splitting my time between marine science and marketing in various different roles. And then, as I mentioned in my video, I took a career break in 2009, 2010. And it was following that career break that I kind of decided to think about starting my own business.
Sticking with you, Simon, Jennifer Edogan has asked an interesting question as well. Do you think you can have a job and run your own business?
Yeah, of course you can have a job and run your own business. I think it just needs some good partitioning of time. I must admit I wasn't very good at that initially, and I did have a couple of difficult conversations with my boss, who did notice a dip in my performance and things weren't as they should be in my job. But I got better at it. But in reality, when you kind of reach a tipping point with your business where you do realise that it is perhaps occupying a bit too much of your thoughts and your time, and that's when you kind of have to decide really whether you're going to stick with your job or not. But yeah, for the first 6 months, I was juggling both.
I want to stick with that phrase tipping point that you used. We've picked up on a lot of questions related to this. So thank you to Tim Green, Michael Oliver and William Fawcett Hurst for your general questions here. Roland, first of all, can you tell us about the tipping point that made you realise you really wanted to make your idea happen? And possibly more importantly than that, how did it feel to reach that point?
I think the tipping point for me really came I can't really particularly define a particular tipping point. It was really through, as part of the university course that I was studying at the time, and one of the kind of final dissertation, as it were to write a business plan. And so as part of that project, I wrote a business plan around the RadFan idea that I'd had. And it was really through researching and fleshing out that business plan that it became apparent that there really was a market opportunity here. There wasn't really anyone else doing the same sort of thing. There was a very large potential market for it. I thought I could, do a good job around the branding, etc., etc. And so really it was through that kind of process, which probably took 4 or 6 weeks of kind of doing the market research and looking at what else was out there. That's when it kind of, I suppose, crystallized the idea that it was going to be a viable business idea if I gave it everything that I had. And then in terms of actually sort of taking the leap to actually go ahead and do it, that really came about, I suppose, coming to the end of my master's course and still the kind of profession that I trained for in architecture, there was still just no jobs around to be had. And I didn't want to go back to just working in an office doing the 9 to 5, sat behind a computer. I kind of quite like the idea of doing something different, and the kind of teaching and learning that I'd had during the master's course gave me the confidence that I could make it happen. So then kind of started entering business plan competitions to really validate the idea and get other people's input and check whether it wasn't me going mad and other people agreed with me.
And how did you feel, and how did your family feel about that?
They were. I was sort of pretty confident. I'm generally a pretty confident type of person. I'm sort of quietly confident. I'm not exactly a huge extrovert. So I was confident that I could make the idea work. My family were very understanding. They weren't necessarily fully bought into the idea, but I was lucky enough to pretty quickly win some of the business plan competitions, and so I think that helped kind of validate that the idea was sensible and reasonable. So yeah, it was. I think in the early days, I was just kind of loving the whole experience of learning about running my own business, and I was kind of enthusiastic and inspired by that. I don't really remember being daunted or nervous about it. I'm probably more that now than I was then, as the business gets bigger and the kind of scale of it sort of grows with the business.
Great. How about you, Simon? What was your tipping point and how did it feel?
Well, I suppose the tipping point in terms of starting the business was signing the lease on my premises, so finding the building that I wanted to be in and committing to having this monthly rent payment, and that made me sort of realise, right, I need to get serious. I had a rough business plan, but that's when I had to flesh it out. And I got a lot of confidence from talking to a good friend of mine called Ed, who has a lot of experience setting up businesses and is actually like a Harvard MBA, so he knows a lot about business. And he said to me, this is a pretty low risk business. He says, you're not going to have to invest a huge amount of money. It's probably going to give you a return fairly quickly, so go for it. But I think having his backing and the lease was kind of my tipping point. The second tipping point, in terms of when I just dropped out of my job and went for it full time, I suppose that was when I felt like I could take a sort of modest amount of money from the business to cover my sort of living costs. A lot less than what I was getting paid, but enough to keep me going.
And how did your family feel about you taking that jump?
you have to have difficult conversations with you because nobody can see the idea that you have in your head, and I think that's partly where the business plan comes into it, because it crystallizes the idea and it gives you something that you can present to others, such as your family. That shows you have thought about it. It's not just a kind of pipe dream. So the conversations I had with my family were, I kind of used my business plan to say, look, this is how it's going to work, and this is why it's a sensible idea. So yeah, I guess it is a huge thing, quitting your job and losing that income. So you've got to be prepared to defend your idea and kind of fight for it.
I think that's where putting it down on paper in a business plan actually gives yourself the confidence that you've covered all the kind of important points, and you haven't missed something where you kind of quit everything, go for it headlong, and then realise that there's a huge hole in the business that you didn't see coming, and you've quit your job for no good reason. So it's a sensible thing to do.
You draw out some interesting aspects of other questions that were asked within the platform as well, and those questions were about, is it convincing yourself or is it convincing others, and if you believe in an idea, is it enough, or actually do you have to validate that with other people? And perhaps we could answer that furthermore by talking about this other thing that you've mentioned, which is the business plan. Now, I'm certain that we could start a debate within the enterprise shed about business planning and how formal or informal business plans can be. But tell us about your experiences. Simon, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, business planning is one of those things that it's presented to you quite quickly, especially if you seek advice. So a couple of agencies that I went to gave me this quite daunting template, and they asked me to think about all these things that I hadn't done already. But actually, it was a conversation with someone who said, yes, that template's important. There are things in it that you need to think about, but they might not all suit your business. So he suggested to me to try and just write a couple of pages to crystallize my ideas into 2 pages, which basically summarized what I wanted to do, and why I thought it was a unique idea and had legs, and how much potential I thought it had in terms of financially to make money. And that was a great first step, because those 2 pages became the template for the bigger thing. The hard part of business planning is projections. So trying to figure out how much cash flow you'll have into your business. I hate all
the guesswork.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a great phrase that financial forecasts are only useful to make horoscopes look believable.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. But you can, to an extent, inform those projections with your market research and things like that. But yeah, it is a bit of guesswork. And what I found actually at the end of my first year is that the top line figure in terms of where I wanted to be was fairly accurate, but the breakdown of where I was getting that from the different areas of my business was completely, different to what I had projected. So yeah.
Now, Roland's already talked about the dissertation that he wrote, which essentially was a huge, fairly academic version of a business plan. But I know you have some reflections about then entering the Santander business plan competition and how diluting it down was useful. Do you want to tell us more?
Yeah, I think that's the first thing that I did when I decided to start working full time and to bring the RadFan to market was to take that academic business plan that I've talked about, that kind of helped crystallize the idea and do all sorts of different market research. But it was a 75-page document, and distilled that down to 4 sides of A4. And so that was a really useful process to go through to really kind of distill what was important to communicate to other people about why this business was worth doing, because there was lots of useful stuff in the 75-page document that was kind of good research for me to know in my head, but it wasn't necessarily something that other people needed to know about why the business was going to be successful. So distilling it down to a kind of manageable document was a really useful thing to do, and I think still it's sensible to have a very brief business plan, because at the end of the day, I think there are two different types of business plan. There's one that you can use for your own consumption, to just be comfortable that you've done all the research that you need and you've kind of dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. But then there's the kind of sales document as well, where you're telling other people about your business and why it should be successful, why they might give you investment, or why they might work with you, or whatever else it might be. And the sales one is short, sharp, snappy, and the one that's for your own benefit, usually in the very early days of the business, is kind of a very detailed document. And it depends how you work, but I quite like to have everything kind of written down and in one place. And it's amazing how much of that initial research that I did over 4 years ago now is still very relevant to what we're doing now, and the market sectors and the kind of areas that we've highlighted as potential places where we could go. We're either there or we're just entering that now, or whatever. So it's still a useful document.
It comes back to that tipping point and how much you need to know and have validated, and whether or not you need to have written that down to be able to have validated that for yourself, whether you need to have shown a bank or an investor or even your family that document to be able to validate it. So thank you very much to Millie Rooney and Graham Mead for those questions. Okay, I'm going to go in for a couple of short, quick-fire questions this time. First of all, one question from Krishnan Raja. Is becoming an entrepreneur what you expected? Start with Roland.
I think it's better than I expected. This will sound counterintuitive. It's less work in terms of hours, but more work in terms of brain space. So I work quite short hours, but I struggle with brain space.
Okay, Simon?
I think it's better than expected as well. I think it gives you so much freedom in your day-to-day life that it just feels like all of your time is your own, I guess.
Perhaps a very challenging question to pick out just one, and we'll find out whether or not Simon and Roland can be short and snappy at this one. Thanks to Ren Banner for this question. What's the single most important factor in the success of a new venture? Who wants to go first on that one?
Preparation, I would say. So people always talk about being lucky, but I think being lucky is being prepared for when fortunate events come along and being able to grab them. So I think doing your research and being prepared to grab the opportunities as they come.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree. I think preparation, I think we talked about business planning a few minutes ago, and that planning, that distilling of your idea is important. And I think one of the things I've noticed on the MOOC is that a lot of people who are entrepreneurial or consider themselves entrepreneurial say that they're flooded with ideas, and they just have so much that they think they could do that it's sometimes hard to sort of distinguish which direction to go. And that planning is about doing that. It's about it's about distilling your idea, but also setting parameters so that you don't go off in a million different directions.
That leads us on to another, perhaps short fire, but perhaps you'll have lists of things to answer as a result of this question. Thanks to Lurotex, Mark Hewlett and Abdel Ghani Bouzian for this question. What type of market research did you actually do? So we talk a lot within the whole sphere of entrepreneurship, but also within this particular course, the Enterprise Shed, about go out and identify a need or create a need, in fact, if you're not already finding one. What was the market research that you both did?
So the initial market research that really jumps up into my head is there was another business on the market at the time who was selling a similar kind of product to what I wanted the RadFan to do. And so I found the phone number for the guy that had invented it, and I phoned him up and asked if he would like to have a chat. And he was a very friendly guy and more than happy to talk on the phone. So he just talked through the different aspects of his business and, how he'd found trying to get a fan to sit on a radiator, getting it to market, etc. So I found that fascinating. I think inventors and entrepreneurs will often talk to you about their idea because they're still so passionate about it. And he knew as well as I think any of us sitting around the table knows, it's not the idea that's the easy bit, it's the bringing it to market. So he had nothing to hide in sharing the ideas, because he knew that the difficult bit was bringing it to market. And often when it's a new product, the people are worried about competition, but actually having a bit of competition, all it does is just build the category, so everyone makes more sales. So really it was finding something similar on the market and phoning them up and having a chat.
And what about customers? How much did you find out about whether anyone would pay you for the RadFan?
That is the $1 million question in starting a business. Trying to work out how much people would pay for the RadFan was really, really difficult. We did some focus groups, we did some questionnaires, we did this, that, whatever. We started off selling it too expensive because we were led by our accountants, and accountants always want you to sell things for the most margin possible. We always had $39.99 in our head was the correct price. We started off selling it at $44.99. We went up to $49.99 on the back of accountants' advice. We then had some fairly sluggish sales, dropped it to the price that we thought felt about right for the product, based on nothing more than, I think it feels like it's a 40 quid product, and sales went through the roof. So that was the right product, right price for the product. It should have been that all the time. And really it was a gut feeling. A
little bit of trust your intuition there.
Yeah, intuition, but I think that was informed intuition based on doing a lot of research on other similar types of products that were out there, and then just being, making an informed judgment.
Which of course your accountants hadn't done.
Yeah, well our business is only 5% of their job, whereas RadFan is 100% of our job, so we know the product better than anyone else.
Yeah, that's right. How about you? What was the market research you did to be certain enough that you should give it a go?
Well, it's very different for me because I wasn't bringing anything innovative to the market in a way. I was just taking an idea that I'd seen somewhere else and bringing it to a new area where it wasn't currently represented. So part of my market research was looking back at the businesses that I had enjoyed using and that I thought had a sort of good, sensible model, having those conversations, emailing them, asking how they got started. But in terms of the practical things, like how do you set your pricing once you set up in Tyneside, which is where I was, I looked at other operators to try and determine sort of what the market would bear. And I also looked at various other factors in terms of, the depreciation of my equipment. How much would it cost me to buy a kayak? How much would it cost me to buy a bike? How much would it cost me? And then how much would it depreciate over time? What would the servicing cost be? Blah, blah, blah. And then in terms of identifying whether or not customers would come, that was a tricky one. I think there was a bit of faith involved there. I really liked the idea. I liked the thought of it existing on my doorstep, and I just hoped other people would as well. Yeah.
Great. Probably the biggest set of questions are around the theme which I'm going to mention next. So a few questions here embedded into one. So thanks to Olga Kamneva, Raja Vasa, Roger Turner and Marina McCartney for these questions, and they're all about funding and breaking even, and how might you even pay yourself. So there's a general sense within the enterprise shed. How do you start a business when you haven't got any money, and how do you get some money through running a business that means that it can be done and could replace current employment? So I'm throwing that as a general theme out there.
Well, I liken it to buying a house. There's very few people who can afford to buy a house outright. So you kind of take a calculated risk, don't you? You might invest a little bit yourself, but you will take out you will take out debt. And in the case of buying property, it's a large amount of debt. But the risk you take with buying a house is you hope in time it will be worth more than what you paid for it. So you rely on it accruing value. And that's what you're doing with your business. You might take out a loan or debt, but you hope that over time your activities, your work, the effort that you put in will add sufficient value to the business that it will service its debt. You will pay the mortgage on your business, and over time, hopefully, create something that perhaps even could be saleable. You might not own that business forever, but you might step out of it, but it has intrinsic value. But it's a real thing. If you don't have the money, you've got to get it from somewhere, and that usually is a loan or an award or something like that. In my case, it was all loan, really. I took out low interest government loans to facilitate starting up a business.
And you started with competitions, didn't you? So tell us about your funding journey.
I haven't put or my business partner, I haven't put any of our own money into RadFan. We didn't particularly have the money to put in, and we were fresh out of university, but that was kind of a great place to start the business because we'd survived for that long without a job, and so really it was just a conversation, with our parents and families, etc., to help support our living costs while we, essentially did another year to try and get the business off the ground. And so the early money that we got was through entering business plan competitions that had cash prizes, and we were lucky enough to win some of those. And then it was going on to raise money from venture capital investors, and really the kind of thinking that we had is, as long as the money that we're borrowing is unsecured against us, so that they can't come against us for our personal assets, of which we didn't have a huge amount, then we were pretty comfortable with that. And that's what most venture capital early stage funding is. It's unsecured against you as the business owner. So we were comfortable taking out that kind of finance. But having said that, we were able, through raising money and entering business plan competitions, from starting the business full time, it took us about 9 months to start paying salary. So it wasn't a hugely long time between, from starting the business to actually start paying ourselves a reasonable salary. It was it's a living wage. So we've kind of gone through fits and starts since then, but we're still nowhere near break even, but we are paying salary, and it's a growing company. It's going to take a couple more years till we're at break even. But
I think there's a general perception from some of the questions I've been reading in the Enterprise Shed that your business has to break even for you to be able to be paying yourself anything, and actually you've demonstrated that you should just go and start it, because you'll be able to pay yourself way before you break even.
Yeah, and certainly for something like RadFan that's incredibly capital intensive, because it's a product company where you need stock and you need production tools and all those sorts of things, it needs a hell of a lot of money up front. So the break even point can be quite a long way away, but that doesn't mean to say that you're not going to be able to pay yourself a salary or take anything out of the business, or that the business isn't successful until it reaches that point. We may have even sold the business before it's even at break even point. That's not the reality of running a business, I would say.
There was one other question that I wanted to ask you, Roland, in particular, about spending money, I suppose. And this question comes through Twitter, and @PICheap asks, at what point did you apply for patent protection? And you've got quite an interesting story about your approach to patenting.
I do. We do have a patent, and we amazingly have an award patent on the RadFan. And the only reason why we did that is it's very difficult to get venture capital investment without a tick box that says you have a patent. So that's really the only reason why we applied for a patent, because my feeling on patents is that they're only as valuable as the money you've got to defend them. We know as a small business, and the fact that it's a very simple product, and the beauty of it is that it's such a simple product, that if someone wanted to copy us, they could very easily. So the patent that we've got is really very much a tick box exercise. It doesn't really protect us from people copying the idea of the RadFan. So really what we've focused on is building the brand, building the customer base, continually bringing out new products, so that we're forever moving. So if someone copies the RadFan, by the time they get it to market, it'll be 2 years old in our product range. So really it's about continuing to bring out new products and develop the brand, develop the customer base, deliver really great customer service. that's been our theory around patents, because we've met far too many businesses that have raised similar amounts of money to us, and they've poured it all into IP lawyers and patent protection, and they haven't sold anything, and they've gone out of business, but they've got a patent that's pretty rock solid. But there's no point having a patent if you don't have a business.
So how cheaply can you do patenting?
I think we spent less than £5,000 to get a patent, but that was still it's expensive. That was still £5,000 to get a UK only patent that doesn't give us a huge amount of protection. And we think we did that about as cheap as we could get away with. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, we're going to start wrapping up. So I'm going to start asking some of the wrap-up questions, and starting with you first, Simon. Philippe Samulan and Kerry Postlewhite ask, if you were starting all over again, what would you do differently?
Do you know what? It's really practical things. Like, I wish I could say it was something sensible, but businessy. But there are things that I've learned about the stock that I carry that I would do very differently. So I would buy a different type of kayak. I would buy a different type of bike. It's nothing big. It's just lessons learned from the sort of day-to-day niggly things that get on your nerves that you could address if you just know it a little bit more.
How about you?
Again, I think looking back, I feel like there's 100 different things that I would do differently, but at the same time, you've got to give yourself credit for the situation you were in at the time. I don't think we've made any howlers. I think there are quite a few decisions we could have made slightly more sensibly. I think in general, making decisions more slowly but acting on them quickly is something that we try to kind of adhere to at RadFan. So really take the time to make the right decision, but once you've made it, act on it quickly.
Great. This one I think is a really interesting question. So thank you to Stephen Harrison for this one. When would you call it a day on a business?
When you don't enjoy it anymore, I think. In that sense, it's quite similar to a job. If you're getting up in the morning and you're dreading it, then I think it's time to call it a day. At the moment, I don't know if it's a honeymoon phase or maybe I've just found something that I love doing, but it's great. I love it. So I'm a long way from that, I hope.
There was a related question in there for you from Lord Harbles on Twitter as well, Simon. Do you ever regret making your hobby a business?
No, not at all, and I don't, and I know that because I had 2 days off this week, and on one day I cycled and another day I kayaked, because I still really am engaging with my hobbies outside of the business, and even though the way that I do it professionally is different to the way that I do it personally, so no regrets at all.
Great. How about you? When would you call a business a day?
I think a very similar answer to what Simon said. If you're no longer enjoying it, that's an obvious time. I think because we have equity investors, quite often that decision can not be ours. They can close the business on a whim or based on our performance or whatever. So quite often that decision isn't ours once we've taken the type of investment that we have. It's also not as easy as us deciding to quit the business. We can quit the business, but the investors can keep the business going, and RadFans could still be going out there, but it wouldn't be under our control anymore. So it gets a bit more difficult to close the doors. We could step away, but your baby essentially keeps going without you. So at the moment, I'm still enjoying it, still want to keep doing it, still want to keep watching it grow.
And I think as part of that, there were a lot of questions I picked out too from Jill Carnell and Connor Salters about work-life balance. There's been a lot of talk within the platform about people with families and how do you keep this work-life balance, and have you got any reflections on that?
Yeah, well, I think I sort of alluded to it earlier. Is one of the things that I've been surprised about is how much time I've got, and so I work pretty short hours, which means I get a lot more time to spend with my family. I'm generally at home by sort of 5:30. I don't leave until 8:30 in the morning, whatever. So I get to spend lots of time with my wife and son, and long weekends. So work-life balance is really great. The hard thing is brain space, and so that does take a bit of decompressing and a bit of a bit of time to step away from the office when you get home. But still, at least you're at home. You're there to lend a hand, help out, and be part of the family rather than never seeing them and stuck in an office, which is
and the thinking is productive to your own benefit rather than to someone else's benefit.
Exactly.
So, Any reflections on work-life balance, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, I think my situation is quite unique because my place of business is 10 footsteps away from my house, so there isn't necessarily a boundary between work and life anymore. My wife comes and spends time in my work because we have a cafe and things, we can do that. My friends come and that type of thing. So, in my case, I spend a lot of time at work, but it's not like I'm spending a lot of time working. Sometimes there's quite a lot of leisure time associated with my job. So
Okay, so there were some other really interesting questions and some quite humorous ones as well. Two that I'll just give a mention to, but we perhaps won't answer at this stage. Jill Hamill and Sakthi Devi were asking about, is there an age limit for entrepreneurs? We have two quite young gentlemen here, and who were the oldest entrepreneurs that we know. And someone else within the platform, Gareth Jones, who's taking the Enterprise Shed course, is 74. So I'm interested to see whether there's anyone older than 74 in the Enterprise Shed. So do answer that question for us. And I can't let this panel be complete without referring to Simon Milner's question, which I'm sure is directed at Roland here. He asks, do you need interesting hair to be an entrepreneur? But actually more seriously than that, and perhaps we can end by asking this question. Simon was really thinking, how important is a sense of humour to running a business?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important because so often what you do in your business is very personal to you. It's, as I've sort of said, it feels like your baby. But especially doing what we're doing, when it goes out there and it's online and it's public, you get people that say nasty things, and unless you have a sense of humour, you can take that very personally and you can get quite angry about it and defensive. So you just have to have a sense of humour, see the funny side, rise above it, and kind of carry on in the knowledge that the majority of people are supportive and helpful and nice. I think the other thing to say is it can all feel pretty serious and pretty scary when you start talking about big numbers and borrowing large sums of money and all of these sorts of things. And so again, you've got to keep a good sense of humour about it and look at it in perspective. I think otherwise it can all get a bit too much.
I agree. Good sense of humour, and I think I'd add to that, just trying to maintain like a very positive outlook. That's hugely important. I think, in my business where we have some real quiet times of year and things like that, it can be hard to remain positive because you maybe aren't getting the cash flow or the customers. But you've got to be that person, because if you're not being positive and having fun and enjoying your business, then anyone who works for you or anything is going to very quickly feel the same way. So you kind of have to lead the charge, keep it light, keep it positive, and enjoy it.
So I think that we'll end on that point. You can find out more about Roland, Simon and their businesses. Simon's yet to get anyone from the northeast of England coming into the Cullercoats Bike and Kayak. They have a great little snug there, so if you are local, go and say hello to Simon. And we've seen a few people already buying RadFans through the Enterprise Shed, so do look out within the platform for Simon, and I think Roland will be visiting at some point as well, and do say hello and add some comments and questions as you go through the course. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you more so for joining us in the Enterprise Shed, and we look forward to the next 3 weeks with you.
Thank you for the questions.
Bye.
Cheers.